Many people think it's impossible to make a Mustang a capable corner carver without spending a fortune on mods. When novices ask for advice, they're often told, put the entire insert aftermarket company name here catalog on your car. But not everyone who wants to autocross their Mustang can afford to do that. And the incorrect idea that you have to change every single suspension part on your pony to start autocrossing has kept many people from attacking the cones in their Mustangs. The truth is, it doesn't take a catalog full of mods or a vault full of cash to make 79 to 04 Mustangs handle much better than stock. But how can you get the most bang for your buck when building on a budget? I recently got an amazing opportunity to help Charles, the humble mechanic, improve the handling of the Mustang he bought to battle the guys from Gears and Gasoline in their $7,500 V8 American Muscle Car Challenge. This 2000 Mustang GT went up against a 1998 Camaro in 3 events: an autocross, a rallycross, and a drag race. Both teams went way outside their comfort zones for this challenge. If you haven't already checked out their channels and this series, you definitely should. They're all super nice people, and their videos are a lot of fun to watch. This video covers the handling mods that were made to the humble mechanic Mustang and how they can help your budget autocross Mustang build. My contribution to this project was to check out the parts list Charles was considering, then make suggestions based on the limited budget. I also looked at the car after Charles bought it to give a second opinion about its bones. The body panels had some dings, dents, and repairs, but the unibody was in great shape. The suspension, however, was completely worn out. Charles ended up spending about $1,500 on suspension mods and tires to get this Mustang ready for battle. That's a relatively small amount of money. But I've always said, when you're building an autocross Mustang, it's not about spending the most money, it's about spending the right money, which is why I love budget builds. They force you to prioritize, compromise, and think about your build as a whole. Budget builds are all about balance, and so is handling. Spending all of your budget on just the front suspension, or just the rear suspension, isn't balanced. Making improvements in multiple areas is a smarter strategy. This car wasn't built to the rules of a specific SCCA category or class. Always refer to the SCCA rules before modifying your Mustang. If your Mustang has good bones but bad suspension, you're going to want to replace the old rubber bushings. Nearly every rubber bushing on this car was in rough shape. There's speed hiding in the spaces in between the hard suspension parts. Upgraded bushings are an inexpensive way to improve performance. I suggested forward offset Delalume or poly bushings to improve steering response and increase caster, but there wasn't room in the budget. So Charles replaced the worn-out rubber A-arm bushings with a set of used poly bushings that don't move the A-arms forward. Compared to rubber bushings, poly A-arm bushings reduce deflection and improve steering response. The old rubber steering rack bushings were replaced with new poly bushings, which also improve steering response. The rubber sway bar bushings were toast, so we went with poly sway bar bushings and new end links with poly bushings. Better bushings allow the sway bar to do its job more effectively. The rubber upper differential housing bushings were well past their prime, so we chose a set of spherical upper differential housing bushings. Spherical bushings allow for more articulation, they eliminate deflection, and they don't bind. They're a huge improvement over rubber or poly upper differential housing bushings, and they help move the limit of traction further out. Most of the rubber bushings in the rear upper and lower control arms were on their last legs. I was surprised to see the bushings in the upper control arms were deteriorating because it looks like they were replaced at some point. The decision to upgrade the rear control arm bushings or the rear control arms is somewhat controversial. There are lots of options on the market, and there are strong opinions about upper control arms and bushing material. The one thing everyone agrees on is that bad bushings are unsafe. I'm not a fan of swapping poly bushings into the OEM rear control arms or using aftermarket rear control arms with two-piece poly bushings. I prefer rear control arms that use three-piece poly bushings. The hard center bushings reduce deflection, and the softer outer bushings allow for articulation with minimal bind. But quality rear upper and lower control arms with three-piece poly bushings are expensive. It can also be expensive to buy OEM-style replacement rear control arms. I checked online and found replacement OEM-style rear upper control arms for $32 each, and replacement OEM-style rear lower control arms for $124 each. That's $312 for all four. Several aftermarket companies make relatively inexpensive rear control arm kits. Charles chose SR Performance entry-level rear upper and lower control arms. These tubular steel control arms feature two-piece poly bushings. In all honesty, these control arms wouldn't be my first choice or even my second choice. But at $120, they were the best option for this project, and they will improve traction and composure out on course. Better bushings make your Mustang feel more present. The car responds to your inputs faster and provides clearer feedback. Upgrading the rubber bushings on your Mustang will make a noticeable difference everywhere out on course. Being able to easily adjust your suspension allows you to adapt to different autocross courses. The humble mechanic Mustang also had to adapt to rallycross and drag racing. In order to dial out the Mustang's factory-installed handling flaws and capitalize on the other mods, we decided on caster camber plates and adjustable shocks and struts. Nose-heavy Mustangs have a tendency to understeer at the limit of traction. Caster camber plates allow you to increase negative camber and reduce understeer. You can also increase caster, which helps with composure and corner entry. I've seen a few low-cost caster camber plates for SN95 Mustangs. The weak link appears to be the quality of the spherical bushing. They'll work to get your car aligned for autocross, but I wouldn't expect them to last as long as more expensive versions. The caster camber plates also allowed Charles to get rid of the worn-out OEM rubber upper strut mount bushings. The shocks and struts that came with the humble mechanic Mustang were shockingly bad. Adjustable shocks and struts can be very pricey. Some people will disagree with me, but I think they're absolutely essential for an autocross Mustang. They allow you to fundamentally change the personality of your car by fine-tuning understeer and oversteer, and help you compensate for your current and future mods. We chose KYB AGX adjustable shocks and struts. One adjustment increases both compression and rebound. The front struts have 4 settings. The rear shocks have 8 settings. You can easily adjust the shocks and struts in between autocross runs. I haven't seen any long-term autocross reviews of the KYB AGX shocks and struts, but at $525, they're a relatively inexpensive option for people looking to add adjustability for autocross. We ended up setting the front struts at 2 and the rear shocks at 4 to get the car neutral. The SN95 Mustang unibody is often referred to as the 5th spring. All Fox Body and SN95 Mustangs can benefit from chassis bracing. The plan was to tie the chassis together with subframe connectors, a strut tower brace, a rear shock tower brace, and a lower chassis brace. But the tight budget didn't allow for all those chassis stiffening mods. Charles ended up bolting in a new SR Performance strut tower brace and a used rear shock tower brace of unknown origin. Many Mustang owners and autocrossers don't think a rear shock tower brace is necessary, but I prefer to use them on my cars. Strut tower braces reduce flex in your front end. The added rigidity helps prevent front alignment changes when you're carving corners. Inexpensive strut tower braces do tend to be heavier than more expensive versions. I'm sure most people would say that you absolutely must install subframe connectors on these cars. But street category, the entry-level SCCA autocross category most people start out in, doesn't allow subframe connectors. Many Mustangs have been autocrossed in street category without subframe connectors. The humble mechanic Mustang didn't end up with the ideal amount of chassis bracing. But when you're building on a budget, every little bit helps. The Eibach Sportline springs that were on the car were way too low for autocross and rallycross. And the front springs were actually broken. I suggested Ford Performance C-springs, but they weren't in the budget. So we went with used OEM 2000 GT springs. With the OEM springs, the car sits comically high because a lot of weight has been taken out. But honestly, I'd rather autocross a car that's too high than too low. When the car is too low, you can run out of suspension travel when your Mustang articulates out on course, leading to instant and aggressive understeer or oversteer. The less expensive entry-level lowering springs I found all lower the car more than I would like. In street category, you can't install lowering springs. That means plenty of Mustangs have been autocrossed with OEM springs. Wider 200 treadwear autocross tires can cost a small fortune. We all want the widest tires possible, but running a narrow tire is often the only option when you're on a budget. To save even more money, you can pick up a set of used tires. It's common for people in the autocross community to sell or trade tires that still have several events left in them. The all-season tires that came on the car wouldn't allow Charles to get the most out of the suspension mods. These used 255/40/17 Falcon Azenis RT660 tires still had enough grip to make it through the challenge, and they only cost $300. Most people would say that 255 tires on a big, heavy autocross Mustang aren't wide enough. But Charles was able to prove that a good driver can be fast on used tires with a relatively small contact patch. If you've watched my other videos, you've seen me run some pretty fast times on 245 tires. There are pros and cons to buying used autocross tires. The pros are that you're saving a lot of money, and it's a cost-effective way to try several different tires to see which brand or model you prefer. The cons are that you really don't know how much life the tires have left in them just by looking at them. They could have been heat cycled to death or improperly stored. You have to trust the seller, and that involves some risk. You should absolutely check out the whole Humble Mechanic vs. Gears and Gasoline $7,500 American Muscle Car Challenge series. And when you watch the Autocross event coverage, you'll see that this Mustang, even with all of its compromises, handled really well on the autocross course. It didn't roll over onto its roof because it sits super high and doesn't have stiffer sway bars. The chassis didn't break in half because it doesn't have subframe connectors, and it didn't slide all over the place on the tiny used tires. Because this budget build was balanced, the car came out composed, confident, and very capable. I had a blast helping with this project, and seeing how much better the humble mechanic Mustang got with just $1,500 worth of suspension mods and tires reconfirmed something I've been saying for years. You can build a fun, competitive autocross Mustang without breaking the bank. There's one final way the humble mechanic Mustang can help with your budget autocross build. This 2000 GT is for sale. If you're interested, I've put Charles's contact info in a pinned comment below. Reach out to him for more details. And if you ever have any questions about your budget autocross build, please ask. I'm always happy to help.